All right. Hello and welcome to Adaptive Movement, where we make fitness fun for kids. I'm Coach Jason, and I'm joined here today with Mr. Alan Wetherald. Please introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Hi there. Yes, so I'm Alan Wetherald. I'm the science teacher at Key Elementary School, and for the past decade, I've been a student dungeon master, where part of a after-school program called ASEP that is sponsored by our PTO allows teachers to select an activity that they want to put on for students, and being a lifelong Dungeons and Dragons player and knowing the many academic social benefits of this, I wanted to bring it to Key, and it's one of the highlights of my year and the students' year. And I've had many years of students go through it, and they become, for many, lifelong players. They begin to pick up more, fantasy literature and reading. So it's been a wonderful experience that I continue to do.
That's perfect. Yeah. Thanks for hopping on. I'm really
You're
looking forward
welcome.
to talking to you today. And, we're a fitness program for kids, and we make it fun, make it engaging using Dungeons and Dragons. So, uh, how would you describe the game itself? What is Dungeons and Dragons?
Excellent question. So there's a lot of current media that has kind of helped give popularity and clarification to it. But Dungeons and Dragons at its core is a cooperative storytelling game with a group of players that act like characters in, let's say, a fantasy book like Lord of the Rings.
Mhm.
And then you have a leader of this called the Dungeon Master who acts like a referee and a narrator, right? Where
Mhm.
they set up the story for the players who have a different persona that is outlined on a character sheet, and they work together to solve in-world problems that are, typically in a medieval fantasy setting. It involves the use of many different sides of dice, and they are responsible for cooperating as a team, prioritizing, and using their abilities to help solve whatever problem is outlined by the dungeon master.
Right, exactly. So you're running the game, you're the referee, you're the narrator. So you're making these judgment calls and facilitating the whole thing. But really, the heroes of the story, those are the players at the table, right?
Yes, so every student, and while role-playing games have evolved and changed form, over the course of its 50-ish year history, the way I run games is, I guess, pretty heroic, right? Where there's no thievery and things like that, where you have kind of these archetypal um, roles that are derived from history. Like, let's say someone is a mage or a magic user. Think, kids often will read Harry Potter. Let's say you have one that's like the knight, like
Mhm.
Arthurian legend. You might have some, that are, like a bard, right? A musician. And students are often attracted to one for one reason or another, and they kind of imbue this character with their personality so that while you're playing a character, there's still the student coming through and how they solve problems, but their thinking is also challenged by the problem that is presented to them from the dungeon master, and ultimately as they work together, to solve this problem in a campaign. Each one is typically they get a kind of highlighted cinematic moment,
Mhm.
um, and it kind of highlights a student's maybe individual skill of speaking or being diplomatic, or it helps to raise a skill of a student if I know them, being their teacher, pretty personally, so I can give them challenges that will encourage growth in a certain area. And oftentimes, by the end of the campaign, the 8 weeks or whatever we have, you can see the confidence in those different areas has grown. So um, the intentionality for on my role, the DM, is to encourage that growth while making it fun and allowing them to have this, exploration of this world, and using their imaginations as much as they can.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible. So the kids at the table here get to explore and quite literally go on a hero's journey, right?
Exactly. So, um, and you mentioned that, like the classic Joseph Campbell, archetype of, different, the hero's cycle. So they'll, have this, they'll start off, and many of them will have familiarity with these concepts. So if they are Minecraft players, most modern video games have some derivative of Dungeons and Dragons where you advance and gain skills and equipment and go on harder and harder, quests, that kind of thing. Um, but they're only limited by their imagination.
Hmm. Right, right, right. Yeah, I like to think of it how the kids get to level up in the game and out of the game.
Right. So this has a great combination of, well, your character, maybe they increase their dexterity. So part of the game is that a character is broken down into different attributes
Mhm,
that give this, mathematical component to, well, if I'm this, I want my character to have this higher ability, let's say to jump and climb. So
mhm,
when I'm performing this task in the game, I have a better chance of when making a roll to be successful. Then out of the game, you might say, well, I want to be like my character. And oftentimes, even playing into adulthood, you become quite attached to characters you play for a long time. I know I did for my first character I played for many, many years. And it's when Coach Jason has put that in tandem with leveling up your own abilities outside of this, I could definitely see this being very motivational, where you have this um, uh, reciprocity and synchronicity between the two activities.
yeah, exactly. Because you're training, you're going, and as you go through the game, you gain experience, right?
Hmm.
So you're gaining experiences at the table, going through these scenarios. Like we said,
Hmm.
what you're doing and what I'm doing. Since you're running the session, you're the referee, you're the narrator, giving them some scenarios that they have to navigate, uh, or you could also call them encounters, right? So you go through one
Right.
encounter after another and you got to navigate or negotiate your way through. So sometimes it's a social encounter here where you got to
Hmm.
talk to the king and make a
Hmm.
deal, or maybe you're uh you know, either falsely accused of something and you have to defend yourself, or you have to, clear up some sort of misunderstanding. Then you've got your combat encounters, and you've got, exploration. You actually get to
Hmm.
go to these, unknown places and be an explorer, discovering things that are, long and lost, relics of old. So you're giving them an experience that does change them in the game and out of the game.
And it also, as the DM and you as the coach, or being both, you want to reward the creative solutions they have for things. So if you, I mean, most of the time you are improvising. So as the dungeon master, you want to have intentionality behind the challenges they're given and how you want them to interact with each other and then with the world.
Mhm.
Um, and when something comes up in my mind, I think, oh, well, that was pretty neat. Or they get interested in a aspect of the plot that you didn't expect. you want to see where they go with it.
Hmm.
And I perhaps in the same way with coaching, where, well, we started doing this one exercise or activity, but it seems like they're very interested and more motivated by this particular activity,
Yeah.
right? You want to build upon where that motivation organically comes from, and that way you can build from there. Um, and the more diverse encounters and diverse activities you do, the more likely it is the student is going to find something they're interested in. I mean, just from
Hmm.
doing this for many years and having lots of um, personalities within it, oftentimes, I know when I put them against this one thing, they're going to use this one ability. They can't wait to do this one thing because that's
Hmm.
kind of their niche. Um, Perhaps similar with coaching, where this is like a pretty big strength, so we're going to emphasize that. Um, so again, there's a lot of similar principles between the two activities here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So everyone at the table here comes with their own strengths and weaknesses. They have a unique character. They all play their own role, and as we do this together, they have to team up, right? There's some teamwork, there's collaboration and creative play, so they have this safe place where they can kind of play around and see what, let me lean into whatever kind of caught my interest here and kind of pull the thread and see what happens.
Right. And not that they're free from consequences, though.
Yeah.
If students are beginning to kind of, especially newer to role-playing games in general, and they make a decision that may be considered a little outlandish, it's my job as the DM to think of, well, what's the logical consequence for this? Well, the city guard come up, and after um, were dancing on top of a place you shouldn't have been, they come and grab you and get you down,
Yeah.
whatever it happens to be. So um, that way they can understand perhaps the dynamic of how they engage in this world, the creative, imaginative world, um, and be able to think a bit more long term
Hmm.
than, let's say, if they kind of come in with a related experience from video games. Yeah, there's certainly consequences there, if you don't make the right moves at the right time. Um, but I think the as the group coheses together in the first session or two, I've typically found that um, they understand the dynamic of how it works in the imaginative game world.
Right. Right. Okay. So it's so good. There's a few other questions about the game, but for anyone who is totally new, let's just back up a little bit and say, let's say it's day one, or sometimes what we call session zero, right? So you're
Hmm.
doing a session to get ready to play the game. Okay. So if you could just kind of walk us through what you do with that session zero and how
Yep,
the players get started with character creation.
right. So when I play the game and we have our session zero, meaning we're not actually beginning game content yet. Before we begin, we have to understand the expectations of, I guess you could say, behavior and conduct at the table, number one.
Yeah.
Number two is understanding what this game is in general, and then having them go through the character creation process of, how are you representing yourself in this imaginative kind of medieval fantasy, Lord of the Rings kind of world.
Mhm.
So I'll begin by kind of explaining in a similar way that when I'm in class with them, if you are listening to me narrate information about the story, that's to have you get context for what you're going to be doing when we go to each session. So I kind of explain it like, okay, if you ever go to the movies,
Hmm.
it's annoying when someone behind you is talking during the movie. It's annoying when the movie is spoiled, or whatever it happens to be. So that way I can kind of set my expectation of, okay, when you hear the me narrating as the DM, that's information for you to
Right.
understand the scenario that you're about to be involved in. And typically it will end with you making a bunch of decisions and you talking way more, and then me becoming called a non-player character, where all the other things you interact, people you interact with that aren't the players themselves.
Yeah. So
Um,
like making a movie.
right, exactly. So you want to have, there will be times where different characters are highlighted, and when you're engaging with each other,
Mhm.
we're not all trying to spout ideas at the same time. And one way I convey that, as I do when I'm in class with them, is that when you're having a discussion about a topic, you want it to be like a tennis match and not like a
Yeah.
water balloon fight.
Oh, that's good.
Right, a water balloon
Yeah.
fight is everyone's taking their idea, they're throwing around, you're getting hit, no one's understanding anything, it's a chaotic mess. But if it's a tennis match, I have an idea, boom, someone else has something, boom, they hit it back, boom,
Yeah.
boom. Um, and then once we lay out the kind of ground rules, we would get into our character creation.
Hmm.
And as we're kind of explaining the game here, where what I have them do is not really think about the stats, right? The numbers that relate to their strength and wisdom and intelligence and all that kind of thing, but come up with an interesting background story. So start with, well, when I was an infant, I was abandoned at a wizard's college and I just kind of grew up there.
Yeah.
Or I grew up always loving the forest and I learned how to track things well and
Mhm.
I'm good at crafting. So you have them begin from an imaginative level. Many times they'll come in with a character from a book they know, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to basically make your own version of Harry Potter in this world, great. It gives you a fun background story that gives you motivation to do different kinds of engagements in the world. So I had them begin there, and then we'll go through all the other, kind of homework part of it and fill in the stats and the numbers, and I explain that kind of thing. Um, they like getting all their gear and, things like that.
Oh yeah.
But
Gearing
it's
up.
very minimal to begin with, right? Because we want to get into playing.
Right.
So we get through that as quickly as we can. They have their sheets ready to go, and then I'll begin with some kind of um, opening hook, just like you would do when coaching or in teaching a lesson. You have to have some kind of hook that gets them interested. So there are a million different hooks. You can derive things from books and movies, and maybe something in their character background just kind of lent itself to being a good opening hook related to that character. So when you begin with that hook, um, then it's a great way to have a get the students to begin engaging about, well, how can we solve this pretty micro problem and begin with something very small? And you're not getting into world spanning
Yeah.
doomsday mega evil villain guy yet. Where it's like, okay, you hear wolf howls from outside of the inn.
Yeah.
The city guard needs help. It's a small village, and they call you to come in and investigate why these wolves seem to be howling so close to town. They find that unusual. And
Right.
then the players start to go, "Oh, that's strange." It's like, well, I'm a ranger. I know, maybe I can speak with them, and I have this ability. And then they begin to
Hmm.
engage in that hook. So then it would progress from there, right? Um, and the story would unfold. While I might have a plan in mind of things, I want the players and students to lead it as much as possible because that's what will get the investment from them, which is typically not hard to get in Dungeons and Dragons. But that way they have ownership of the game, and I can just
Mhm.
kind of respond, make sure things are staying on track, and
Right.
allow them to kind of take over.
Right. So there's a big element of the game is child directed or player directed,
Oh,
right? So
absolutely.
they're
Yes.
not just doing what you tell them to do, right? It's not boot camp. It's not like, even in a lot of sports, it's just like, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to do it. Or especially when you're practicing and training,
Right.
kids are often bossed around, they don't have much authority yet.
Right.
And this gives them a chance to make their own choices and learn how to roll with the consequences.
Right. Yeah. And, they're, of course, being students of mine, they're under the teacher's thumb all day. So it's a different tone when they come in to play the game. And they
Mhm.
know we can joke around a little bit more. It's much more loose than class, but at the same time, they know it's not going to go off the rails, and they can't make it go off the rails too
Mhm.
much. But it is driven by them. And I'll begin with a hook, and then as they kind of um, organically want to investigate this over that, this character intrigued them more than this character. Um, it it evolves really session to session, so I can't write it, like a story.
Yeah.
And for maybe families or people who have played, while there are certain historically famous modules which you
Mhm.
run players through that is scripted, which is good for people who are beginning to do
Oh yeah.
this. The improvisation can be difficult unless you train and just do it a bunch, over many years. But um, you just kind of follow their lead, and then you will engage them in puzzles and interactions and encounters that will hit those different growth areas.
Mm.
Um, whether it's being persuasive when they're talking, or in my group every week I have a rotating party leader, where when a big decision has to be made, I say, okay, I'll roll and say, okay, this week you're the party leader. When you have a big decision to make, everyone's going to give you their opinion and input, and then you tell me what you do, and then I
Yeah.
can go from there.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need a little timer, and I say, okay, you have like 2 minutes. Put the
Mhm.
timer down. Um, but that way, every student has a chance to um, have that experience of leadership. And again, that's another great growth situation where I've had students that maybe in class, um, not quite as outspoken or participatory, but in that role, they really stood out and were shining.
Yeah.
So that way you can have these diverse experiences to see where these things come out, these
Right. Right.
outlets.
Yeah. So it's very much an art, so you're leading the group, you're kind of like a, referee, narrator, a little bit like a movie director, but they get together, they get to create their own characters, right? So we're going to go on a hero's journey, right? Who do you
Hmm.
want to be? Who are you becoming? So then we also get into, finding your archetype, right? I'm the bard. I'm here to inspire the party here and make sure that we can keep going, even when times get tough. And the other guy's like, I'm a barbarian here. I'm, gonna right? Attack
Right.
and, I'm big, I'm strong, I'm tough. The other guy's more like Harry Potter, more of a wizard, more, knowledge based kind of type character. You get to play the type of character you want to play and you team up. Right. So it
Hmm.
generally works better when you get a variety of players, characters
Hmm.
that team up. You don't all want to be the same. You don't want to be a copycat. So you get to create a unique group, and you start out, you build set the expectations, get hook them in to the intro adventure.
Hmm.
For me, you get a letter in the mail. It's an
Wow.
invitation. You're
Wow.
invited to the Bard's College Adventure Academy.
Right.
So you're going to be spawning here and starting out in the jungle of Keld, and you have to find your way to Aunt Edna and her walking hut. And once you find Aunt Edna and her walking hut, she'll escort you to the rendezvous point where you'll get picked up by the ship and taken to the Bard's College Adventure Academy, which is located on the island of Haldrathine. So you get your letter in the mail. There's something special about you. You're getting invited for a reason, all
Hmm.
right? And so your first mission is to get to the Bard's College. So how are we going to do that? Well, okay, we start here in the jungle. Uh-oh, looks like, is that a snake over there? Oh, what are you going to do? Okay, so you're able to give them these scenarios, just like we're saying, it's like a movie, except it's not all scripted. That's the other thing, right? So there's part of it is, stuff that you've prepared, these encounters, and then part of it is improvised, right? Which is an incredibly important skill, for everybody in real life. You got to go with the flow. There are plot twists, things you expected to happen might not happen, or the other way around. You get surprised one way or another. And what are you going to do?
Hmm.
Right. And so now you need to handle the scenario. Like we were saying, there's teamwork.
Hmm.
Here's what we could do. There's some leadership, and it's fun. You're on a mission. You're on the hero's journey. It's totally engaging. So, that's why the kids love to do it. That's the other thing. We're talking about something that the kids love to do, like a video game, like that level of engagement, but there's no screens. I think parents might
Yes.
be kind of shocked.
Yes, and that's one thing that I always advertise about the game. And I mean, families who play board games, I still play and love board games, is that it's unplugged in an increasingly plugged in world.
Yeah.
So even while some games might, move to online formats and that kind of thing, nothing can replace the in-person engagement. And as I've gone through these every year, parents will ask, well, how can I kind of replicate this? And while there are board games that somewhat kind of do the job, nothing can compare to the creative outlet that you get from the engagement in the group. So, many may have the antiquated view of the stereotype behind the players of this,
Yes.
and that the 80s, like, quote, satanic paint, that kind of thing. I just that has its own place and time, but I think, and that we've left that
Yeah.
in the year 2024, and people see the many academic, social, emotional, executive functioning benefits that D&D has, that when um, intentionally planned, can help students, as you're doing, Coach Jason, outside of the game,
Right.
in and outside of the game. So you're mentioning goals. Well, typically a character will have an individual goal based on their, like, background story, like I had mentioned. So let's say they'll have their individual physical fitness goal,
Right.
but then you have a group goal. So, well, I need to, well, I'll use a famous movie. I need to go find the six-fingered man who killed my father. But my group goal is to, um, free this city from the tyrannical rule of this evil wizard,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it happens to be.
Yep.
Just like on a team, you have an individual goal because you have an individual um, position in your basketball team, soccer team, but then you have a group goal of winning the game. So there's as far as hooks, you may need hooks for engaging in both sides of this as well into,
Mhm.
for D&D and for getting into, the physical activity part. So, um, the hook and motivation helps lead them to hopefully achieving those goals.
Right. Exactly. There's something that's driving you, personally, and then, you've got the larger scenario at play, whether, oh no, the princess has been kidnapped, we got to go rescue her, or we need to find a way to create a truce between the warring elves and orcs or something like that. What are we going to do, guys? Let's come up with a plan. All right, let's try to execute that plan. And then, uh-oh, surprise, something else. Okay, we gotta we gotta think on the fly here and adapt, So,
Right.
the kids love it. It's an adventure game, right? It's an adventure game. And I often describe this to the parents like the most, magical experiences that you had at summer camp, right? Like you're around the campfire, you're having a real life experience, you're playing pretend, maybe, there were ghost stories or something.
Hmm.
It's a collaborative storytelling adventure game with improv. And, you know, that also gets into the dice, for example. That's one of the signatures of D&D and other games like this. You get to try whatever you want, you get to decide like, well, okay, what I'm going to do is go, okay, there's a snake here in the jungle. Like, all right, I'm going to run away. I'm going to attack. I'm going to go climb that tree. I'm going to hide. You get to do, whatever you can think of and at least attempt to do it. So there's a creativity and decision making,
Hmm.
like you said, the executive functioning there, like, man, I got to come up with a plan. All right. Okay, here's my plan. All right, here's what I'm going to try. And then you put it into words, right? And you're acting it out and nothing's guaranteed, right? So you play into your strengths, you're rolling the dice, So for example, let's say you you have to break into, some old dungeon or something like that, defeat the boss, get the treasure, rescue the princess, but one of the doors is locked. You might try to break the door down, right? So anybody might try to break the door down. All right. So you're going to roll the die and that'll determine, how successful you are, right? So the higher the roll, the better. Okay. So you're setting a difficulty, like maybe the door is kind of flimsy. The difficulty would be lower, like a lower number, like a 5 or a 10, just for argument's sake, right? So if you roll the die and your total meets or exceeds that number is higher than, you're successful. You break down the door and you charge on through. Okay. So maybe the door is fortified. I don't know. It's got iron bars or something, right? Okay, you need a 15 or a 20 to break this door down. This door is not so flimsy. Uh-oh, so what are we going to do, And then that's where you're playing into the strengths and weaknesses of each individual. You're sharing the spotlight, This is where the barbarian's going to shine, right? He's going to rage and like use his barbarian strength here. He's like, "Oh, I'll take care of this." Like, boom, breaks down the door, right? Somebody else is good. When it's time to negotiate with the king, somebody else might take the lead, right? Share the spotlight. I got this. I'm better with words. Like, let me try to handle this one. So there's some teamwork and planning, right? But you get to try things out and there's no guarantee of success, but also you're helping them think about things and probabilities as well.
Yes. So one thing you're mentioning there that from my teacher side that I like the abstraction of
Mm.
for students to gain over time is how the dice and your character sheet, all that, you're quantifying the imaginative world,
Yeah.
right? And that's a pretty abstract skill to have. So over time, when I when I tell them something they're about to engage in, they can kind of compute a number that they're probably going to have to need to match it so they know, am I going to be able to match this? It's like, oh, well, that's a big heavy door. I mean, I that's probably going to be a higher number, or they're assessing the difficulty they're about to encounter and then they have to creatively think about, can I do this? Do I need help?
Yeah.
If I'm going to negotiate with this person who is a famous like grifter or something like that,
Mhm.
um, it helps. There's a lot of mathematical thinking in the game, typically. So that's kind of a unique ability that is drawn from this.
Yeah.
Um,
Changing how you think.
right. And
Yeah.
like you're mentioning, prioritizing, where, oh, we have multiple major things we need to do.
Yeah.
Whoa, how can we work it? Do we have to divide the team? Who are the best people to do job X and who's the best to do job Y? Famously, it's bad to divide the party in D&D, but again, you want to reward creative problem solving
Hmm.
from the group. Um,
Exactly.
so
So exactly. I just want to add on there. It's like if the door was extra fortified, right? Maybe you try to break it down, but all right, this is really sturdy. Like, well, maybe there's a way that we could work together to get some leverage and give us a better chance of success, right?
right.
So maybe we come up with a plan. We could team up on this, or like, what if we built a battering ram and then just smashed right through? Like, oh, well, wait a second. This task, which was once very daunting, with the right tool, right? Oh, wait a second. Well, I'm going to come back and try this again, right? I'm trying and trying and trying again.
Hmm.
And now I got it, right? Because I figured out how to, get
So
the
you
right tool for
have
the right job.
perseverance there,
Yeah.
where and I can definitely say there are times where um, I don't want them to have the easy solution. Like, I
Yeah.
intentionally make it so that you need to work as a team and develop this plan, right? It's this little crucible where they work as a team. And yeah, it can, I don't want to say heated or argumentative, but um, it also builds upon the skill of arguing from rational reasoning about why their position makes sense, and you've left the world of just outlandish blowing everything up with fireballs and having them support their idea with evidence. Again, that's the teacher hat on there, but
Sure.
it's all within the context of the game, where we're just having fun trying to figure out how to do this interesting in-world task, but there are all these um, embedded skills there
Right.
that you could analyze and dissect a session and the interactions for those different skills that, I mean, just from the having the teacher hat on, I try to input as much as I can. Um,
Yeah.
so
I think parents would be shocked, with the amount of skills that you're actually like these kids are acquiring through the experiences they're having, which they're enjoying. They're having fun playing games with their friends, going on an adventure and hero's journey, but you're
mhm,
actually learning how to solve problems. You're learning how to communicate. You're building your new identity, right? You're not just like the same old Johnny. You're like Johnny 2.0. You're a little bit
mhm,
stronger, a little bit more confident,
mhm.
a little bit more capable. This is the new you. And it just
and
goes
they
on
and they
in
will
terms
leave
of
the
skills.
game with that. The more they do it, they leave the game with that feeling, and it and it
Yeah.
and it that confidence comes and progresses out of them. um
Because it's an experience. That's the thing, it's all in the mind, the whole world is mental and it's a real experience that you're having. You're having real feelings about like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about the princess who's been kidnapped, or what? I really need to break this door down. There's an emotional component, just like when you're watching a movie and so needs to like disarm a ticking bomb. Like you said, there's problem solving. It's not going to be just like super simple. Like nobody wants to watch a movie where it's like the guy just goes over and like disarms the bomb in 2 seconds. Like problem solved. Like what's big deal. Like
right.
that's boring.
And I famously and irritatingly to many of my students, leave them on a cliffhanger every session,
Yeah.
right? Because that's the hook for the next one. Because they'll make the roll, and I'll try and line up as best I can. Say, okay, you make the roll, you do this, and you'll find out next week. And they're like, no, what do you mean?
Yeah.
So it is an amazing feeling for me to see them do this, and then I reward them for taking notes, right?
Yeah.
You
Take note.
so in the character sheet, I will say, okay, there's a lot of places you're going and people you talk to and that kind of thing. I reward note taking. So that way, when I ask for someone to recap what happened last time, I'll give them kind of a little reward token that could give them a reroll if they
Yeah.
fumble something next game. So that way, they're writing things. They're you know, again, a related like English language arts skill, kind of looking at the important who's, what's, where's, why's, drawing inferences from things, thinking of clues, putting them together. So that's again, and that's just one piece of this whole the whole pie.
Right. Yeah, it's incredible. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. The sometimes I call it the campaign diary, or have players keep a journal and, so you could use that to pay attention and take notes and they're getting clues from you about what's going on. Like, oh, he just mentioned something about the princess and how, she was going to play an important role in the upcoming coronation or something like that. And like, let me write that down. Like, that might come into play later. And also just building upon your own character, because I know I've done it in my games and as a player, and I have the kids do it as well, where they've got their character and they might even start developing their own character and write things down with some self authorship. So they're actually
Mhm.
writing down, well, my character actually, like Indiana Jones was famously afraid of snakes. That was part of something, maybe he had a bad experience or who knows what, right? And that could be part of his background. So the kids start thinking, who am I? And, what are things that I love and what are things that I fear and things I'm interested in? What drives me? What are my goals? And as they start to write these things down, it changes you.
Yeah, and oftentimes, as they're developing characters, they want to find, well, not just who am I, but who am I in relation to other people.
Mm.
So they might try and say, well, you and I are like twins, and we're going to make our characters twins, and we have these like opposed like abilities, or
Mm-hmm.
think like, mention Star Wars like Han Solo Chewbacca. This character actually saved my life, and I'm kind of like repaying my debt to them,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to kind of go out of my way to make sure they're protected and that kind of thing. Um, so, as they develop their own character, that evolves over time, as does their relationships with each other. And then within that, they're solving conflicts in a, constructive way that, we again, of all the things I hope progresses and follows them out of the game, it's resolving conflicts
Yeah.
of, okay, first, do I understand all the information? Okay, maybe I don't. Let's start there. Make sure everything's clear. Did I communicate that? Did we miscommunicate? Something like that.
Yeah.
So that's again another social emotional um, kind of intentional piece that can be added into the game. So um, yeah, it's just as in the teaching and coaching, it is, upon that leader to know their group and individual students really well, to know where the areas of growth can be.
You got to know your players for sure, and they really do learn so much more through Dungeons and Dragons and all these other role-playing games. One of the things that drives me crazy since, you reminded me of what everyone's been talking about for years now, the growth mindset. Okay. Growth mindset and grit and things like that. So I find, one thing, it's maybe kind of like a pet peeve, but just as, since we're both teachers working with students, we're
Hmm.
trying to help them grow, trying to help them like reach that next level, of development. And a lot of times I find, other teachers or parents, it's like they'll ask the kids, they teach the kids in a rote manner, like, well, what kind of mindset should you have? Should you have a fixed mindset where you think you can't learn and you're stuck where you are? Or should you think that you could do better and grow? And it's like a test question. They treat it like a multiple choice exam. So they'll be
Right.
like, okay, students, which is the correct way to think, or something like that. And it's more like a test question, but that doesn't actually give the kids that mindset. You are not cultivating that mindset by just asking them, what kind of mindset do you think you should have? But instead, you're giving them an experience where they actually develop the mindset. So they are going through these challenging scenarios. Man, maybe this gets hard. This doesn't work. Like any good movie or plot, there's going to be extra. Oh, there's adversity, right? Oh, the
Hmm.
bad guy shows up and oh, you're in trouble now. Like, whoa, what are we going to do? Things are getting worse. Like, oh no, this is a plot twist. Things are not looking good. Do we give up? Well, I don't know. I think maybe we could work together. Maybe we could find another way. Like maybe we just stick with it. Maybe we could still work at this and let's keep going here and keep going and keep going. And through that actual experience of doing it, they learn the lesson.
Exactly. So, I mean, in my case, being their science teacher, it is all about inquiry, right? Where we
Mm,
begin with some kind of, again, the the more, I've gone through teaching and doing DMing, there's, I mean, one-to-one parallels in how you
yeah.
engage and that kind of thing. So you'll set things up with kind of an open-ended question of, well, I'm not telling you yes or no. I'm telling
Yeah.
you to look for evidence. We're going to find it, let's say, whatever happens to be physics,
Hmm.
and you're going to perform this experiment encounter, let's say, and we're going to see where the evidence leads us, where the information takes us, and talk about it and understand it, as opposed to just saying, well, this is X and this is Y.
Yeah. Some
Um,
trial and error
and I
involved.
mean, they can pretty much intuitively say it's like, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, why would I not want to have a growth mindset? And that's just kind of, you know,
Yeah. Check
uh,
that box. I did it. I
right,
did
right, right.
it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now, what
Done.
do I do to like train and exercise that? So, that's part of, my own lesson structure when I'm with them teaching. And then when it goes to the game, I kind of apply that same principle to it where, um, you're not going to have an easy, answer to any one given thing. Um, you may have to have a point where you um, you understand that someone else is more appropriate for this role than you are. So
Mm,
there's like a humility factor where not everyone can be like the superstar all the time, where it will come, right? Um, so there's a way to have students almost go through, if you think of the encounters almost like a curriculum,
uh-huh.
if you want to be that intentional about it. Um, but while making it feel organic and like in the game. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Like
yeah.
let's say you're doing a like a science type curriculum, or maybe there's some engineering involved, right? And okay, you guys just crash landed on an island. How are you going to get off this island, right? How are you going to make shelter? How are you going to make a fire? You're got to build like some sort of ship or raft or whatever. Like, are you going to make your raft out of banana peels? You could
Right.
try. Like, let's see what happens. You want to try, or do you have a better idea? Or you got to think about it, and we'll see how that plays out. Right? You get to play it out, see what happens, and see what works. So there's some experimentation, and that's how you really are learning, right? It's like a science fair, it's hands-on,
Hmm.
right? But you can do anything, especially because we're talking about, using your imagination. It's like the magic school bus. Put it that way. You could learn anything when you get on board the magic school bus. Miss Frizzle says, "Come on, kids,
Right.
let's go." Right? You could go anywhere. You could go inside the human body. You're learning about your digestion. You're learning about, outer space. You're learning about, anything. It's all in the imagination and it's all in the experience. So it's not like, other rote things. Like you could just Google facts, that's not really going to help kids, especially nowadays.
Right.
You really got to think.
This is all application.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So even when it comes to a point where a the player character comes across some kind of unusual creature,
Mm-hmm.
and they then they kind of take in our real world science and apply it there, and they might say, well, it looks like some kind of lizard, but it's in this environment. Maybe it's lost its way from home.
Yeah.
So
Maybe it's
it's
looking for food, or maybe it's
right,
protecting its cubs or something. Who knows?
right. So that way, again, of the things I want to kind of reward, it's our students taking, effectively applying background knowledge and skills, even if it might be quote metagaming, where
Hmm.
maybe your character wouldn't know something, but the player does know. You want to reward that
Yeah.
because it shows they're critically thinking about something.
Right. That's
Um,
the thing. Exactly. So you're able to reward them for their creativity, for their solutions. So then they realize like, oh, this is something good. This is fun. This was successful, right? It's nice when you come up with the plan and win. You're not there specifically like trying to rain on their parade and make life hard and like, you got to learn some lessons. You're going to fail and you can't, but
no, it's
you're
not.
facilitating.
It's not it right. It's not an adversarial kind of game.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, so many times when I've been playing, they surprise me with a creative thing, or they think of a plot hole that I had because I'm just narrating, going through it, and I go, huh, yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And, try and play it off like I knew they were going to do that the whole time.
Sure.
But I think, like, wow, that was really impressive. Like, they kind of thought, well, how does the temperature of this spell would affect this thing, and they're kind of
Yeah.
coalescing all these in-game magical mechanics with real-world physics, and kind
Right.
of it all comes together. I'm like, that is, I'm like, that's too good. Like
Yeah.
A plus if I were to grade you on that.
Yeah. Sometimes the
And
kids really blow your mind with
oh,
their out of the box
it's
solutions. You're like, that's
amazing. It
phenomenal.
Yes, you can't beat moments like that.
Yeah.
Just in the same way in class, when they have some kind of epiphany, light bulb kind of moment as they go through that productive struggle.
Hmm.
And they, and that you see they finally get there, and it's hard to quantify or really explain as a DM when they kind of have had that growth moment. You just kind of know,
Yeah.
um, from that individual student or as a group together.
Yeah. The light
And
bulbs
nothing
just
beats it.
start going
And
off.
they know it too. They know it
Yeah.
because they think that because they're all together. Like, wait, okay, look in your notes. That happened. Wait, what's your charisma score? Okay, then they're doing all these, abstract and computations and in and out of game. And I'm like, oh, okay, okay, tell that to Mr. Weatherald. Okay, I'm like, okay, what's your plan, guys?
Yep.
And in my mind, I'm like, that was incredible. And it
Yeah.
gives you but then on top of it, it also made for a great story. right?
Mm-hmm.
All those under things they did built to what was like a really neat climax or whatever it happens to be. So, yeah, I mean, we could be here for days talking about the merits of the game and
Yeah.
why it has only grown in time, and why in teaching, whether it's inquiry-based math, science, engineering, all of those have this scenario reward kind of basis where um, there's so much that can be intersected and combined with role-playing games and D&D in general to
Mhm.
help with, I mean, any other facet of a student or a person's life.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you touched on a really important thing there, saying it's not an adversarial game, and especially as they get older and older, especially approaching like high school and adolescence, sports in particular becomes extra competitive. If you're not really gifted, if you're not like keeping up and, a superstar, you might not even play the game as much. They're going to have the more athletic kids, the more naturally gifted kids get extra playing time, and it creates a wider and wider gap. And, I work with a lot of kids who, they could try to do that, but they're not so interested and motivated. They're not so competitive and driven by all the typical team sports, which it gets kind of cutthroat at a certain level, like
Sure.
we got to win. It's game day. It is adversarial. Like when you're on the soccer field, it is adversarial. Like make no mistake about it. But when you're playing this action adventure game at the table, you're all sort of on the same team, actually, even though there is competition. There are monsters, there is adversity, but it's not a competitive game.
Right, where I am outlining the challenges you have, but in the background, I want them to win, but
Mhm.
in order to have growth, right, you can't have this easy, right, train track into it,
Right,
right?
the
They
hero's
have to have
journey.
these times where they're engaging in, reasoning out a discussion between the best course of action, etc. So, um, it is not like, I mean, there are some board games that are that where the person running the game is just
Mhm.
out there trying to get the players.
Yeah,
This is not that.
right.
It's outlining challenges, but in the background, I want them to, right? You can't overcome adversity if there's no adversity.
Yeah,
I don't know how else
yeah.
to say it
Tell
other
that.
than that.
See, helicopter parents, are you listening? Yeah.
So, there has to be some productive struggle there, and that's where the skill and the growth and all that will shine. And you have those moments where it's like, okay, okay, tell it to Mr. Weather, ready? Okay, we definitely got it. And you don't have those moments unless I say, okay, well, um, this person isn't convinced by what you're saying.
Yeah.
Whatever the circumstance happens to be. Um,
Right. Right. Yeah,
so
you're giving them the adversity, and that just touches back on, navigating through these encounters. There's some different types of challenges. Some are easier than others, some are harder, some have more at stake, there's a consequence to your actions
mhm.
affecting the outcome here. So they're learning all sorts of lessons, and it doesn't have to be like this huge competitive team sport, like us versus them, like football, basketball, soccer, that kind of thing. So that brings up, like the last kind of thing I want to touch on today is how, at least with live action fitness, combining it with movement and with training, so these kids get to create their own characters, and they're training, they're leveling up, they're gaining their experience points. I give them fitness targets, I give them personal workout routines, and also little mini games that we play together, which is kind of like Mario Party for anyone who's familiar with that. So we do have some competitive elements because that is important in life, but it's not the same, like we said, huge cutthroat us versus them game day, like only one of us is gonna leave here as a winner, but instead what we do is our mini games, so we do like a little one-on-one or maybe free for all, or we'll do like a freeze tag game. We'll, throw the medicine ball or do an obstacle course, or it's a race against the clock. Guys, we're all on the same team. There's some sort of consequence here. Like, we got to finish this in 2 minutes. Let's go, 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 go. No,
Hmm.
help me, help me. Oh, get down. I'm going to jump over you. I'm going to crawl over here. Like, oh, come on, hurry up. You can do it. That was great. Let's go. We're running out of time. Oh my God. So there can be the competitive element and achieving, overcoming obstacles, but it doesn't have to be, super cutthroat. That's the important part.
Right, where they're competing against themselves.
There you
Right,
go.
where let's say, when I go to my fitness class and they have the screen, I think, okay, well, last time I was in the orange zone for like a third of the workout. Today I want to be in there
Yeah.
for like two-thirds of the workout. So
Mm,
that way, just like their character has this personal goal, they can say, well, what did I do last time as my baseline? What do I want to do to improve? And then you, Coach Jason, kind of set that hook or context that makes me want to try harder, right? And beat that time limit. Or if you theme it to like D&D and I have to like run up and like shoot a little, suction cup bow and arrow at something, and then I go to, right, whatever it happens to be, where again, you don't want it to, for many students, even adults, that workout can feel like a chore,
hmm
right? You
Yeah.
want it to be something that just becomes part of their own regular routine and is fun, and they have there's not as much anxiety around it and for trying to achieve those goals.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Exactly. So I like what you said there. You're not competing against like the other kids, you're competing against yourself. You're just taking yourself and you're on your journey and you're leveling up, and that's different for everybody. That journey is different for everybody, but you're just taking, one step at a time, and
Yeah,
that's all it is.
yeah, and
So,
meeting students where they're at and people
yeah.
where they're at and going from there.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you so much for chatting today. I had a blast, and we're describing the game and trying to share it, with new players and parents who may not be familiar. So this was fantastic. And of course, you can only describe it so much, but the real magic is when you're there at the table or moving
Hmm.
around and training, together, having the experience, having fun. So who knows? Maybe we can actually play some games, do some demos sometime.
Absolutely. And, as the phrase goes, a journey, of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So
Perfect. All
get
right.
on the road.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Mr. Weatherald. I really appreciate your time.
You're so welcome, Coach Jason. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Perfect. All right.